Imagine standing on the precipice of your greatest triumph, the culmination of years of blood, sweat, and tears, only to come face to face with the very person who tried to break you, the one who disowned you after 15 years of chilling silence. That was my reality just last week. The lights of the gala glittered around me, celebrating everything I'd fought for. But the moment I slipped into the restroom for a quick breather, my world lurched. There she was. My mother. 15 years. 15 years of absolute silence. She was at the mirror coolly reapplying lipstick, every inch the socialite she'd always been. For a second a foolish hope flickered. Maybe she wouldn't recognize me. Then her eyes met mine in the reflection. Her hand mid-air froze. I watched her jaw clench. "Rachel," she stated, her voice like ice, utterly detached, as if we'd simply bumped into each other at a country club, not after a decade and a half of estrangement. "I didn't expect to see you here." I gripped my clutch, my knuckles white, a shield against the sudden storm. "I could say the same," I managed, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. "What brings you here?" She finally turned, her posture as stiff and unyielding as ever. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always supported education." "And me? I'm being honored tonight," I told her, meeting her gaze head-on. "For my work in research." A fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly masked. "I see," she said, turning back to her reflection. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Those words, they sent me spiraling back. I was just 19 when I walked out of their house for the last time. The years before that, they were a suffocating blur. In high school I battled a crushing depression, but in our family weakness wasn't tolerated. "What could you possibly be sad about?" my mother had snapped, irritation lacing her voice, when I dared to confide in her. "You have everything. You're just making excuses." But I was drowning. The relentless pressure to be perfect, to uphold the pristine Palmer name, was crushing my soul. My grades, once flawless, began to slip during junior year. By senior year I was barely treading water. My parents didn't see a struggling child desperate for help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment, a smudge on their polished image. When I was accepted only into a community college, my father's fury erupted. "This family has standards," he roared that night, pacing the living room like a caged tiger while I clutched my acceptance letter, shaking. "And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine. But you'll do it on your own." Kicked out. Just like that. I remember the literal weight of that duffel bag as I left, but the emotional weight was crushing. It wasn't just clothes. It was the stark reality of being utterly, completely alone. My parents? They didn't even come to the door. My mother remained on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I simply ceased to exist. My father had retreated into his study after delivering his cruel ultimatum. I felt invisible, discarded, as if I'd never been a part of their world to begin with. For weeks I crashed on a friend's pull-out couch, adrift and scrambling. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. It was the one thing I could control. I slung hash at a diner to pay for tuition and rent, scraping by until I could afford a tiny studio apartment. It was a brutal grind, classes, work, and that suffocating sense of failure clinging to me like a second skin. But then a flicker. A tiny defiant spark of hope. Being truly on my own, far from their constant corrosive judgment, allowed me to breathe. The air was thin, yes, but it was my air. My first year was a whirlwind of late-night study sessions and endless diner shifts. I chose chemistry partly because I genuinely loved it, but also because I desperately needed to prove something to myself and maybe, just maybe, to them. It wasn't easy. My high school grades were a joke and I felt miles behind my classmates. But without their suffocating expectations, I could just learn. I can still picture my first chemistry exam. Weeks of preparation, every formula, every reaction seared into my brain. When the professor handed it back, I was paralyzed with fear. But there it was. A 92%. I almost burst into tears right there. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had earned it. It was the first agonizingly slow step toward rebuilding everything they had shattered. Over the years I transformed in ways I never imagined. College was relentlessly hard, but I learned to fight for what I wanted. The more I poured into it, the more I saw myself grow. By the time I earned my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student. I was a warrior who'd clawed her way into existence. I transferred to a 4-year university, still facing obstacles, but now I knew how to push through them. The shy, insecure girl from high school had vanished, replaced by someone who could command a classroom, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, once a daunting challenge, ignited a fierce passion within me. I didn't just want to pass. I wanted to excel, to scream to the world that I wasn't the failure they branded me. I continued working part-time, but I also interned at local research labs, gaining experience that eventually led me to an incredible opportunity: a lead researcher at a nonprofit dedicated to advancing science education. It wasn't just a job. It was my mission, my way of creating a sanctuary where other kids, the ones told they weren't good enough, could find their own path. My bachelor's graduation should have been a triumph, but it was just another stark reminder. My parents hadn't called. Not a single congratulatory word. No questions about my future. Nothing. My father, the titan behind a massive fertilizer company, swam in wealth. He and my mother hosted lavish parties, hobnobbed with elites, but for all their riches, I didn't exist to them, unless it was to be criticized. Even after I graduated with honors, after I'd worked myself to the bone, I was still an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives, a painful reminder of their perceived failure. The sting was a familiar, unwelcome guest. Foolishly, I'd hoped for a glimmer of acknowledgement, but there was none. It was as if I never mattered, and that realization cut deeper than I dared admit. The only beacon of light was my Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister. The family's designated black sheep. She never cared for their rigid standards and, despite being shunned herself, she was always kind to me. She was the only one who called on my birthday when my parents simply erased me. Seeing her in the crowd, a lump formed in my throat. She waved, beaming, and after the ceremony, she met me in the parking lot with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she choked out, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you." It was a small comfort, but it was something. It wasn't their chilling silence. Aunt Lydia was the one who taught me that family wasn't about perfection, that love could bloom in the most unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed their gilded path. She only cared that I had made it against all odds. A few months after graduation, as I was wrapping up a research project, my professor, Dr. Collins, a passionate, old-school chemist, pulled me aside. He'd seen my relentless work ethic, my sheer persistence. "Rachel," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I've been in touch with colleagues at Oxford University. They have an environmental chemistry research opportunity, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." Oxford? Me? One of the most prestigious universities in the world? I thought it was a joke. But Dr. Collins insisted. This wasn't just a job, he explained. It was a chance to make a real impact. "You deserve this," he urged. "Don't let fear hold you back. You've proven yourself. Now take the next step." Hesitantly, I applied, barely believing it could happen. The process was rigorous, terrifying. Then, weeks later, the email arrived. "We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University." I moved to England, without telling anyone. Not my parents, not old friends. Only Aunt Lydia. I called her just before I left, and her voice, firm and loving, pushed me forward. "You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back, Rachel. Do this for yourself." She understood. She knew I needed to disappear, to escape the suffocating shadows of my past, and forge a new future, free from anyone's expectations. I begged her not to tell a soul where I'd gone. I didn't want them to find me, didn't want their judgment to drag me back. So I boarded that plane to Oxford with just a backpack and a fragile, burning hope that this was my chance to finally become the person I was always meant to be. I found a tiny flat and I dove headfirst into my research. The first few weeks were brutal: new language, new culture, overwhelming isolation. But the more I immersed myself in projects that truly mattered, projects that could impact the world, the more at home I felt. Chemistry was no longer about proving myself. It was about shaping the future. Years blurred. I earned my master's, then, propelled by an unstoppable momentum, I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, but I was relentless. Oxford was my home now, and there was no turning back. After countless sleepless nights and endless lab experiments, I finally earned my PhD, a respected researcher in environmental chemistry. The next step felt utterly surreal. A professorship at the University of Cambridge. It was a dream I never dared to chase, not because I didn't believe I deserved it, but because I simply couldn't imagine being given the chance. I'd worked so damn hard, yet the recognition still felt like it was happening to someone else. At Cambridge, I found a new purpose: teaching and mentoring the next generation. The freedom to shape minds, to pass on the knowledge and passion I'd gained, was more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined back in my community college days. I had transformed from the girl who didn't belong to someone who commanded a classroom, taken seriously. And yet, a tiny raw piece of me still looked over my shoulder, always wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, if they cared enough to even find out. Since I'd left, there'd been nothing. No calls, no letters, no attempts. I sometimes wondered if they ever thought about me at all. By the way, if you're still with me through this wild ride, and you want to hear more stories of resilience, triumph, and unexpected twists, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. As my mother turned back to the mirror, primping her hollow words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," echoed, mocking me. Did she truly believe that? My mind replayed the years of trying to be enough, the community college rejection, the deafening silence, the way they erased me the moment I walked out. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the bitterness in that bathroom still stung sharp and fresh. I had sacrificed everything, crossed an ocean, earned multiple degrees, become a respected professor at Cambridge. And here she was, acting like my entire arduous journey was just some trivial afterthought. I, the failure they cast aside, now stood on the brink of international recognition, capable of leading research and mentoring brilliant young minds. And for what? To receive a cold, dismissive nod from her? As she glided out, back to her gilded world, I realized something profoundly liberating. I was not the girl she left behind. I was a woman who had meticulously, deliberately erased every trace of them from my life. Their approval? I didn't need it. I'd built a life on my own terms, and even if they would never, could never understand that, it was enough. The gala ceremony began shortly after she disappeared into the crowd. I took a shaky breath, trying to dispel the suffocating weight of that encounter. The clinking glasses, the polite hum of conversation. It all felt distant, muted. It was time. Time to claim my place, the role I had fought so ferociously for. The stage lights were blinding, a spotlight on the future I'd built. They called my name. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening, yet it resonated with an eerie hollowness, as if I were observing someone else's life unfold. I walked onto the stage, outwardly calm, but inside my heart hammered a frantic rhythm. This wasn't just an award for my work. This was my testament. This was my declaration to the world that I was more than the damaged, worthless person my parents had tried to convince me I was. This was the moment I stood on my own 2 feet, with nothing left to prove to anyone but myself. Just as I started to truly absorb the magnitude of the moment, the host's voice boomed, cutting through the celebratory din. And now, ladies and gentlemen, an exciting announcement. In recognition of the groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a grant of $2 million to the recipient of this award. The room fell silent. Every single eye in that opulent room swiveled toward me. My heart lurched. $2 million? The number hung in the air, surreal, overwhelming. But wait, the announcement wasn't directly for me, not yet. It was for the recipient. My name hadn't been revealed. I was still reeling, trying to piece it together, when the host continued, "This extraordinary contribution is intended to support the continued efforts of the recipient's research and further their impact on the world of education." I blinked. $2 million. It was astounding, life-changing. But a cold dread began to seep in. The donor was anonymous. They didn't know I was the recipient. As the words echoed, my gaze swept the crowd. And then I saw him. My father. Near the back by the exit, he stood up abruptly, his face a mask of raw disgust. His eyes, burning with a bitter fury, locked onto mine for a fleeting, searing moment before he spun on his heel and strode purposefully towards the door. His movements were swift, almost desperate, as if he couldn't escape fast enough. I couldn't breathe. The man who had abandoned me, who had thrown me out, was leaving the moment he heard about the grant. He couldn't even bear to stay and see who was being honored. My chest tightened with a searing cocktail of anger, disbelief, and something far darker, far more painful. This was my moment, everything I had fought for finally acknowledged. And he couldn't stomach it. He couldn't stand the fact that the daughter he'd written off as a failure was now standing here center stage, receiving the recognition he'd always believed belonged to someone else. As he pushed his way through the crowd, that strange, heavy feeling of his sudden departure settled over me like a shroud. But before I could fully process it, the announcer's voice cut through the stunned silence again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host projected, "we are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. The $2 million grant, which will be awarded to the recipient of this honor, has been made possible through the contributions of Mosaic Fertilizers, a company led by one of the most influential figures in the fertilizer industry." Mosaic Fertilizers. My father's company. I froze. The donor, the one whose generosity had enabled this incredible award, was his company. The truth crashed over me, a tidal wave. The man who had spent years humiliating me, treating me like an embarrassment, the very man who had stormed out of the room when he realized my success, he was the one funding this recognition. The irony was a brutal, searing wound. The same man who rejected my entire path, who disowned me for daring to live a life outside his perfect, suffocating vision, had unknowingly backed the very award that was meant to be the crowning achievement of my career. It was too much. Too much to grasp, too much to bear. I stood there, utterly stunned, the announcer's words echoing, the applause around me distant, as if I were submerged underwater. The weight of the grant, of this unbelievable revelation, pressed down on me. My heart hammered. "Thank you," I managed to croak into the microphone, my voice shaky but just steady enough. The words felt hollow, inadequate, swallowed by the enormity of what I was feeling. I had to get out. I couldn't stand there another second, basking in a recognition that felt so incredibly empty. I spun around, walked off the stage, and without a single backward glance, I bolted for the back door. My steps quickened through the hallway, my heart racing, only one thought screaming in my mind: my father. He couldn't just leave. Not like this. Not when everything had come full circle. I wouldn't let him walk away from the moment that proved everything he had tried to dismiss. I burst through the door outside, scanning frantically. There he was, by his car, his back to me. My feet moved on their own. "Dad!" I screamed, my voice cracking, rushing after him. He stiffened but didn't turn at first. When he finally did, his face was contorted in that bitter, familiar sneer I remembered from all those years ago, as if my very existence was an affront. "What is it now, Rachel?" he spat, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You think I'm going to congratulate you?" I stopped just feet away, my heart pounding against my ribs. I understood everything now. He had no idea who the recipient was until they called my name. Until that moment, he believed he was simply funding a good cause, sending money to a foundation, believing it would go to some worthy academic he could proudly point to. He didn't know it would be me. He sneered, a cruel twist of his lips. "I don't know whether to be disgusted or impressed. But here you are, taking my money. I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted, right?" The resentment in his eyes was a suffocating weight. The $2 million grant had come from Mosaic Fertilizers, his company, but once donated, the foundation controlled it. They chose. And they chose me. The bitter irony hit me like a physical blow. "I didn't ask for this," I said, forcing my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside. "I never asked for your money or your approval. I earned this on my own, just like everything else." His eyes darkened and he shook his head. "It doesn't change anything. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house all those years ago. No grant or award is going to change that." A wave of pure, incandescent anger surged through me, but I crushed it down. "It doesn't matter what you think anymore," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I've made my own life. And if that money came from you, it means nothing to me." I turned my back on him then, without another word, my heart still hammering. I didn't need to argue. He would never understand. And truthfully, I didn't need his approval. All those years I'd spent trying to prove myself to him, and for what? To stand here, in this moment of my greatest achievement, only for him to be consumed by bitterness and resentment. It wasn't worth another second of my time. The next day I made my decision. I'd spent the entire night wrestling with what that $2 million grant truly meant. At first, it felt like a monumental victory, a vindication of every struggle. But by morning, that feeling had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard truth. It wasn't my victory. It was just another reminder of everything I had desperately escaped. That money, tainted by his company, could never erase the years of pain, the sting of rejection. It couldn't heal the broken pieces he left behind when he threw me out. So I donated it. Every last cent. I didn't want it. Not from him. Not with the invisible, suffocating strings attached. Instead, I directed the entire sum toward funding scholarships for underprivileged students who, like me, had been overlooked, underestimated, and written off. I wanted to give them the chance to build something extraordinary for themselves, without being crushed under the impossible weight of expectations that didn't belong to them. The money, once a symbol of rejection and bitterness, was now transformed. It was part of something far greater, something that would outlast the sting of my father's judgment, something that would resonate with hope for generations to come. As I pressed the donate button, a profound, quiet satisfaction settled over me. For the very first time, I truly understood. I didn't need his money. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his recognition. I had built my own legacy, a legacy that would live on, far beyond the gilded walls of that gala, far beyond the narrow vision of my estranged family. So I've shared my story with you. Now I want to hear yours. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved to save yourself? Or maybe you've had an unexpected moment of triumph over someone who doubted you. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I truly want to know.